The towering spires of Icarian Prime gleamed under the pale glow of its twin moons, their glass-like surfaces reflecting the chaos unfolding below. Inside the grand hall of the Galactic Accord, the atmosphere was thick with tension, a mix of hostility, desperation, and fear. The great empires of the galaxy had gathered here, not in unity, but in a last, fragile attempt to stave off annihilation. At the center of the room stood President Elias Voss, humanity's highest representative. His uniform, adorned with the insignia of the Terran Coalition, was crisp, but the weight on his shoulders showed in the way he held himself, a leader fighting against the inevitable. The Zenari Dominion, Voss began, his voice carrying through the hall, is not an enemy that can be appeased. They do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. They only understand one thing: power. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Across the massive circular table, the towering fur-clad figure of High Warlord Karen of the Tiver clans leaned forward, his massive clawed hands gripping the edge. His reptilian eyes gleamed with disdain. Humans talk of power, yet your species is barely 2 centuries into the stars, Karen growled. What do you know of war? The Tiver have fought for thousands of years. We do not need allies who will crumble when the first blood is spilled. Voss didn't flinch. He had expected resistance. And yet you sit here, warlord, because even you know what's coming. He turned his gaze to the others. All of you do. The Velthari, once rulers of 1,000 systems, now reduced to shadows of their former selves. The silver-skinned Velthari Primarch, seated in silence, looked away. The Korani, silent observers, always watching but never acting. The cloaked Korani delegate remained still, unreadable behind the mask of their species. And the Celeris, Voss continued, turning to the luminous, ethereal beings seated near the back. You preach peace while entire worlds burn. A hush fell over the room. Voss had their attention now. Before anyone could respond, a soft chime echoed through the chamber, followed by the crisp, urgent voice of Admiral Cassandra Hale coming through Voss's earpiece. Mr. President, she said, voice tight with tension, we have a problem. Voss subtly pressed a control on his wristpad. A discreet holographic display flickered to life in front of him. It showed a Zenari war fleet, dozens of capital ships, crossing into neutral space. His blood went cold. The summit was supposed to be safe ground. The Zenari were breaking the rules. Then we're out of time, Voss muttered. He turned back to the assembled leaders. His voice was sharp now, commanding. You don't have to like humanity. You don't have to trust us. But you will have to make a choice. Because if we don't stand together, we will all burn alone. And somewhere in the void, the Zenari fleet continued its silent, unstoppable march toward Icarian Prime. War was coming. The room fell into a suffocating silence. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. Then, the murmurs began again, louder, more frantic. The Zenari were already here. President Elias Voss clenched his jaw. This was supposed to be neutral ground. Even the Zenari had abided by the Galactic Accord's summit rules in the past. Their mere presence in this system was a declaration of war. Admiral Cassandra Hale's voice crackled in his earpiece again. Mr. President, the fleet's advance is too precise. They're not here for a show of force. They have a mission. Voss knew what that meant. The summit had been compromised. He turned sharply, addressing the assembled leaders. This isn't a negotiation anymore, he said, his voice low and urgent. This is survival. The Zenari will not allow this summit to succeed. High Warlord Karen of the Tiver scoffed, baring his sharp teeth. Then let them come. We will meet them with steel. No, Voss said coldly. They won't attack from orbit. They'll strike from within. As if on cue, the first explosion rocked the grand hall. The blast tore through the far side of the chamber, sending stone and steel flying. The Celeris delegation, pacifists to the end, were vaporized instantly. Shockwaves rippled through the ground, and alien leaders scrambled for cover as the once glorious summit erupted into chaos. Voss hit the ground hard, the impact rattling his skull. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but training took over. He rolled behind a fallen pillar, scanning the room. His security team was already moving, forming a protective barrier around him. Then he saw them. Zenari shadow operatives, light, armored assassins, emerged from the smoke, moving with unnatural speed. Blades of crackling dark energy ignited in their hands as they descended upon the chaos, cutting down diplomats and guards alike. Voss barely had time to react before a Zenari warrior lunged for him. A flash of silver. Admiral Hale tackled the assassin mid-strike, plunging a combat knife into its throat. The creature let out a gurgling hiss before collapsing in a heap. "Get up," Hale barked, yanking Voss to his feet. "They're here for the leaders. They're here for you." Across the chamber, the Velthari Primarch was already dead, his lifeless body sprawled across the shattered council table. The remaining delegates were either fighting for their lives or fleeing like cowards. Voss's mind raced. This wasn't just an attack. This was a decapitation strike. "We need to get off-world," he said, grabbing Hale's arm. "Now." She nodded, speaking into her communicator. "Echo Team, we are moving. Priority 1 extraction." The surviving Tuvar warriors fought with savage ferocity, their massive swords cleaving through Zenari assassins, but even they were being overwhelmed. Voss turned one last time to the remaining delegates. "Come with us or die here," he shouted. The decision had to be made now, because outside, the Zenari fleet was beginning its descent. The invasion of Icarian Prime had begun. The Icarian Prime Summit was supposed to prevent war. Instead, it had become its opening battle. President Elias Voss and Admiral Cassandra Hale sprinted through the crumbling corridors of the Grand Hall, flanked by a mix of human security forces and a handful of surviving alien delegates. Behind them, Zenari shadow operatives methodically slaughtered anyone left behind. "This way," Hale shouted, leading the group through a collapsed bulkhead. Their destination was a hidden evacuation hangar deep beneath the summit chamber. A Tuvar warlord, bloody but still standing, ran alongside them. "You were right, human," he snarled. This was never a negotiation. The Zenari come to kill, not talk. Voss didn't respond. There was no time for gloating. A deep, reverberating boom shook the ground beneath them. The Zenari fleet had arrived. Hale's communicator crackled. "Echo Team to Admiral. Earth is under siege." Voss's blood ran cold. "Repeat that," Hale snapped. A voice, harried, out of breath, came through the static. Zenari warships broke past the outer defenses. Multiple cities hit: London, Beijing, New York. The signal cut out in a burst of static. Voss stopped running. The others pushed forward, but he stood frozen, mind racing. Earth was under attack. Humanity's cradle, the heart of their civilization, was burning. Hale grabbed his shoulder. "We have to go, Elias." He nodded, forcing himself to move. Emotions could come later. They'd reached the hangar, where a human gunship was already waiting. The ramp was down, engines primed. More Zenari assassins poured in from the far entrance, opening fire. A Velthari diplomat was cut down instantly. Hale turned, unloading her rifle in tight, controlled bursts. The Tuvar warlord roared, charging the Zenari head-on with his massive blade. "Get on the ship," Hale shouted. Voss helped the remaining delegates scramble aboard as the firefight intensified. The gunship's turrets activated, mowing down Zenari warriors with rapid-fire plasma rounds. "Go, go, go," Hale yelled, diving onto the ramp just as the gunship lifted off. The last thing Voss saw before the hatch sealed was the Tuvar warlord standing alone, surrounded by Zenari assassins. He fought with feral rage, taking down 3 warriors before they overwhelmed him. The hatch slammed shut. The ship accelerated, piercing through the smoke-filled sky. Through the viewport, They saw a Carrion Prime in ruins. Explosions dotted the skyline. The once pristine capital city lay in flames. Voss turned to Hale. "Get me on the fleet channel." Hale punched in the command. The holo display flickered, revealing the battered remains of Earth's defense fleet. The battle was already raging in orbit. Voss stepped forward, voice steady despite the chaos. "This is President Elias Voss," he said. "To every human warship, every pilot, every soldier, Earth is under attack. We stand together, or we fall alone." The war for humanity had begun. From orbit, Earth looked like a dying ember, billowing fires, collapsing cities, and streaks of plasma cutting through the atmosphere. The Zenari war fleet descended in coordinated waves, methodically eradicating resistance as they pushed toward total planetary dominance. Aboard the TCS Valiant, Earth's last operational dreadnought, President Elias Voss and Admiral Cassandra Hale stood in the dimly lit war room, surrounded by officers and holodisplays of the burning planet below. Earth's defense fleet was crumbling. "We've already lost Beijing, London, and most of the eastern seaboard," Hale reported. "The Zenari have deployed planetary assault walkers. Tactical bombardments in key regions." Voss gritted his teeth. Casualties. A pause. Then, hundreds of millions. The silence in the war room was deafening. A hologram flickered to life, displaying Grand Warlord Sferok the Unyielding, the Zenari's supreme commander. His reptilian face was twisted into a cruel approximation of a smile. "Your defiance is admirable, humans, but it is meaningless." Sferok's voice carried across every frequency, broadcasting across the system. "Your world is lost. Your people will serve or die." Voss cut the transmission before he could say another word. He turned to Hale, eyes burning. "We are not losing Earth today." Hale exhaled. "Then we need a miracle." Suddenly, alarms blared through the bridge. New contacts emerging from slip space. A fleet of massive, black-hulled ships blinked into existence, surrounding the battle from all sides. "The Korani," an officer whispered in disbelief. They actually came. On the main screen, the alien vessels moved with eerie precision, shifting between dimensions like ghosts. Korani weaponry, exotic, blue-white energy, unlike anything human or Zenari, tore through the enemy ranks, cutting Zenari warships into molten debris. A transmission came through, a single whisper-like voice from the Korani envoy. "We have seen your fire. We will stand with you." The war room erupted in cheers, but Hale wasn't celebrating yet. She was already analyzing battle projections. Even with the Korani reinforcements, the Zenari had the numbers. Voss studied the war map. Then an idea struck him. A gambit. A final play. "We can't win in open combat," he said. "But if we take out their command ship, the Zenari Dread Fortress, we could break their coordination." Hale's eyes widened. "You want to board the enemy flagship?" Voss nodded. "We cut off the head. The body dies." Hale grinned. "Then let's give the bastards something to fear." She turned to the fleet. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Zenari flagship. We're going in." The TCS Valiant and a strike force of human and Korani ships pierced through the battlefield, racing toward the heart of the Zenari armada. This was it. Humanity's last chance. And if they failed, Earth would burn. The TCS Valiant shook violently as it weaved through the chaos of battle. Explosions flared all around, Zenari warships and Korani phantoms dueling in the void. Inside the armory bay, President Elias Voss secured his combat gear, a reinforced exosuit built for high-risk engagements. He wasn't a soldier, but if Earth was to survive, he had to lead from the front. Across from him, Admiral Cassandra Hale triple-checked her pulse rifle. She caught his eye and smirked. "Didn't think you were the storm and alien warship type, Mr. President." Voss loaded a plasma pistol. "Neither did I." Beside them, the Tivar warriors growled in anticipation, sharpening their massive vibroblades. The remaining human Marines checked their weapons. The Korani operatives, eerily silent, shimmered in and out of phase, preparing their reality-bending cloaking fields. The mission was simple, but almost suicidal. Phase 1. Crash a boarding craft directly into the Zenari Dread Fortress. Phase 2. Fight through Zenari elite forces to reach the command center. Phase 3. Kill Grand Warlord Sverok. Without their supreme commander, the Zenari war machine would fracture. The intercom crackled. 1 minute to breach. The dropship detached from the Valiant, weaving between incoming fire. Hale and Voss braced themselves as the pilot executed a near-impossible maneuver, dodging a plasma barrage before slamming into the enemy flagship's hull. The bulkhead ruptured. "Go, go, go," Hale shouted. The boarding team surged forward, weapons blazing. The Zenari defenders were waiting, their black armor gleaming under the ship's blood-red interior lights. The first wave rushed in. Zenari shock troopers, their electro-lances crackling. The Tiver met them head-on, blades cleaving through armor and flesh. Voss stayed behind cover, taking precise shots, dropping 2 Zenari soldiers with well-placed plasma bursts. Hale fought with brutal efficiency, using both her rifle and a combat knife to cut through enemies at close range. Her Korani operatives moved like shadows, phasing in and out of reality, materializing behind Zenari warriors to deliver instant kills. The corridor became a slaughterhouse. Hale pointed ahead. "We need to reach the command chamber." They pushed forward, grenades tearing through enemy lines, pulse rounds scorching through armored bodies. The battle intensified as they neared the heart of the ship. Then the walls shifted. Zenari war forms emerged. These were Sverok's personal guards, towering, genetically engineered monstrosities, their blades wreathed in dark energy. One of them lunged at Voss. He barely dodged as a massive warblade crashed where he'd stood. He rolled, firing his plasma pistol. The shots barely dented its armor. Hale fired her rifle at point-blank range. Nothing. The creature raised its weapon for the killing blow. Before it could strike, a Korani operative shimmered into existence behind it, phasing a blade through its skull. The beast collapsed. Voss exhaled. But there was no time to celebrate. At the end of the corridor, a massive door rumbled open. Beyond it stood Grand Warlord Sverok. The final battle had begun. The towering doors of the Zenari command chamber groaned open, revealing Grand Warlord Sverok the Unyielding. He stood in the center of the massive chamber, his crimson war cloak flowing over obsidian battle armor, etched with the scars of 1,000 conquests. In his clawed hands, he held a blazing warblade, its black edge humming with barely contained energy. His golden eyes burned with contempt as he took in the boarding team. "You dare bring your filth into my throne." Sverok's voice reverberated through the chamber, his every word carrying pure, unshaken dominance. "You think a pack of insects can kill a god?" Admiral Cassandra Hale raised her rifle and fired. Sverok moved impossibly fast, deflecting the plasma rounds with a single sweep of his warblade. Before the team could react, he thrust his hand forward. An invisible force crushed the air, sending Hale and 2 Tivar warriors flying into the steel walls with bone-shattering force. Voss felt a primal instinct to flee, but he forced it down. "Spread out," he shouted, hit him from all angles. The Korani operatives phased out of sight, flickering between dimensions as they prepared to strike. The Tivar warlord, still standing, roared and charged, his greatsword singing through the air. Sverok met him head-on, their blades clashing with a shockwave that rattled the chamber. The Tivar warrior fought ferociously, striking with all his strength, but Sverok was stronger, faster, colder. With a single devastating counterattack, Sverok's blade carved through the Tivar's chest, splitting him in two. The massive warrior fell in a heap. Voss felt his heart pound. They couldn't beat him in brute strength. Hale, groaning, pulled herself up from the wreckage, blood dripping from her temple. Voss, we need a plan now. Voss scanned the room. His mind raced. The ship's reactor. He turned to the Korani, whose figures wavered in and out of sight. You can phase through solid structures, right? A whisper of acknowledgement. Voss pointed at the ceiling, where thick cables pulsed with energy, running directly to the ship's reactor core. Cut those lines, he ordered. Overload the system. The Korani vanished. Starbuck turned toward Voss, finally acknowledging him. The Zanari warlord's expression twisted into something almost amused. You're the human leader. He took a step forward, his massive presence suffocating. I expected more. You are small, weak, just like your world. Voss gritted his teeth. Funny, he said. I was just thinking the same about you. Starbuck's eyes flashed with rage. He lunged. Voss barely dodged, rolling aside as the warblade split the floor where he'd stood. Hale opened fire again, distracting Sverok for a split second, long enough for the Korani to sever the reactor cables. Sparks erupted from the walls. The ship shuddered violently. Voss grinned grimly. Now let's see if gods burn. The Zanari flagship was going critical. Time to end this. The Zanari dreadfortress trembled violently as the severed reactor cables spat arcs of white-hot energy, overloading the ship's core. Warning klaxons blared in an alien tongue. Starbuck's throne was dying. The Grand Warlord barely flinched. He turned toward the flickering lights above, then to Voss. A desperate move. A coward's move. His voice dripped with disdain. Voss, pulse hammering, stood his ground. Sverok charged. Voss barely threw himself aside as the warblade sheared through the air, slicing deep into the metal floor. Sparks erupted as the weapon lodged into the ship's hull. Now, Hale shouted. A Korani operative flickered into existence behind Sverok, phasing a dagger through his back. The blade vanished into another dimension, disrupting his internal organs with a phantom cut. Sverok staggered, a rare sight. Hale didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fallen Zanari plasma spear and, with a fierce battle cry, drove it through Sverok's side. The warlord let out a guttural snarl, his golden eyes flickering with something he had never experienced. Pain. Voss grabbed a fallen rifle. It was now or never. He fired at the reactor core. The chamber erupted in chaos. A massive explosion burst from the ceiling, engulfing the throne room in a firestorm. Sverok roared in fury, his form silhouetted by the inferno as his war armor melted away. The great warlord fell to one knee. His breath came in ragged growls. Voss approached cautiously, weapon raised. Sverok lifted his head, blood dripping from his fanged mouth. His gaze locked onto Voss, not with hatred, but with something almost resembling respect. You fought well, human, he rasped. But your kind will never rule the stars. Voss stared down at him. Maybe not, he said, leveling his gun. But you won't be around to see it. One shot. Sverok's body collapsed, his lifeless form sinking into the burning wreckage. The Grand Warlord of the Zanari was dead. For a second, no one spoke. Then Hale grabbed Voss's arm, dragging him back to reality. The ship's going critical. We have to go. A transmission crackled through their comms. The TCS Valiant. Extraction en route. Get to the hangar. Now. The team ran, dodging collapsing beams, navigating through flames and wreckage as the ship tore itself apart. Korani operatives phased through falling debris, pulling humans and Tivar warriors clear of deadly obstacles. They burst into the hangar bay just as their escape ship hovered into position. Hale shoved Voss onto the ramp, diving in behind him. The Korani followed. The moment they were inside, the pilot punched the thrusters. Through the viewport, they watched as the Zanari dreadfortress exploded, a chain reaction ripping through the warship, shattering it from the inside out. And with it, the Zanari war machine collapsed. The battle for Earth was over. But the war for the stars had only begun. The Zenari dread fortress was gone, its burning wreckage scattering across Earth's orbit. What remained of the Zenari fleet, once an unstoppable force, now floundered in chaos. On the TCS Valiant's bridge, Admiral Cassandra Hale and President Elias Voss watched as their forces rallied. The Korani warships, silent specters in the void, continued their merciless assault, tearing through the disoriented Zenari remnants. The Tivar war packs, fueled by vengeance, hunted the stragglers. Zenari forces are retreating, an officer reported, disbelief in his voice. We're winning. The bridge erupted into cheers. Voss let out a slow breath, the weight of the battle finally lifting from his chest. Hale smirked. You actually pulled it off, Mr. President. He gave a weary chuckle. Damn right I did. But there was no time to celebrate. The comms crackled. A Korani envoy materialized as a shimmering projection, its voice a whispered echo. The warlord is dead. The empire crumbles. But the Zenari will return, unless they are broken completely. Voss understood immediately. Hale crossed her arms. They want to take the fight to the Zenari homeworld. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The war had been hell, and Earth had suffered beyond measure. They had fought for survival. But now, they had an opportunity. A chance to end the Zenari threat forever. Voss looked at the burning remains of enemy ships through the viewport. His people, humanity, had been fighting for their place in the stars, seen as weak, fragile, insignificant. They had just defied an empire. He turned to the crew. We're done being prey. The room fell silent. Voss clenched his fists. For too long, we've waited for the universe to accept us. No more. The Zenari wanted to break us, to wipe us out. But we are still here. His voice grew stronger. They thought we were weak. They were wrong. Hale's lips curled into a fierce grin. Voss stepped forward, unshaken. We take the fight to them. We strike at their home, just as they struck at ours. We show the galaxy that humanity isn't to be conquered. The bridge crew erupted in applause, cheers of defiance shaking the room. The Korani envoy gave a slow, approving nod. The Tivar warriors bared their fangs in savage delight. A new alliance had been forged, not in politics, but in war. This was no longer just about survival. This was about claiming humanity's place among the stars. Hale turned to Voss with a grin. What do we call this operation? Voss gazed into the endless void, his expression unyielding. Retribution. The battle for Earth was over. The war for the galaxy had begun.